Let's do that. All right, so let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear God in heaven, we are thankful for this Sabbath day, for yet another day that you've given to all of us, where we can meet, we can join up through Zoom to study your truth that has been unfolding for us since the midnight cry came, and also since the time of the end. Really, we're really grateful for the way that you've led us up until this point in the Earth's history, where we are constantly learning new things, and we know we have a lot to unlearn, but we also have a lot to learn to understand, so that we can understand the world in the right way. We're thankful for the spring that is here, which lifts up everyone's mood. It's so nice outside, and we're grateful for the seasons that change and the beauty that you've created that we can see all around us. I pray for a special blessing for this study. May you be with me as I present. Help me to articulate myself clearly. Help me to present the material that I've studied to those that are going to listen. May the listeners also be blessed. May they take something away from this presentation. There's a lot of material, so it can be overwhelming, but even just a small gem that can be personal for each of us. Maybe, after this presentation is ended, I've learned something anew, or refreshed our minds with some of the things that we have previously been taught. I pray for everyone in this movement that is now gathering around the world to study, to learn more about the current events, about our positioning on the lines of this world's history. May we properly understand the past, so that we may be able to dissect the future in the right way, that we may pass the Sunday law test that is very, very near, if not already here in many ways. Help us to see clearly, give us this prophetic eye salve, and bless us as we study together, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So as you can see, today's presentation is going to be about a prophetic critique of the left wing. We will be delving into the left wing and some issues that are very important for us to see, to understand, and to dissect, that originates in the left wing, and that is actually connecting the left wing to the right wing. So I wasn't there last Sabbath, but from what I could understand from Elder Tess, you looked at an article, or some articles last week. There was an article about Steve Bannon. Maybe I asked Annabeth, I think she said that, well, you didn't look into an article discussing Steve Bannon. But we will be taking a look at an article from 2022 about Steve Bannon. It's the title, it's from The Atlantic, and the title of the article, if you want to look it up, if you have a subscription with The Atlantic, I couldn't, so I really just listened to what Tess had to say, but it's titled American Rasputin. So R-A-S or R-A-S and Putin. It's one word. So that's the title of the presentation, and the subtitle, or not the presentation, the article, and the subtitle of the article is Steve Bannon is still scheming, and he's still a threat to democracy. It's by 𝗃𝗏 Senior. Really interesting article, but it's also a very long article. There's an audio version of the article, and it's 1 hour and 5 minutes. So if you want to listen to the article, it will take you 1 hour. But it's diving into the role of Steve Bannon, and this journalist 𝗃𝗏 Senior she spent a lot of time with Steve Bannon, so she really got to know him, and she wrote this article on that basis. And the title was American Rasputin, and I looked it up because I thought, what is a Rasputin? Where does this come from? And the dictionary gives this explanation. It's a Russian starets whose magnetic personality and relative success in treating the Tsar's family gained him favor in the court of Nicholas II, which was a Russian Tsar. He was assassinated by noblemen who disliked his scandalous behavior and feared that he was exerting undue influence on the royal family. So what I take away from this is it was a Russian specific personality that had a lot of influence on the Tsar's family and the Tsar Nicholas II, and how he was the leader of Russia. And we know that Steve Bannon has a lot of influence on Donald Trump. He had a lot of influence in his first term as president. So that's probably the reason for the title. So Bannon, he got so close to this Jennifer Singer that he even invited her to his father's funeral. And that is maybe a bit strange to maybe say that you invite a journalist. It's I think Bannon was aware of why the journalist wanted an interaction with him to write an article, and he knew that this author wasn't a far right leaning journalist. So basically, Bannon wanted this publicity, and he got that by also inviting her to the funeral. And Jennifer, she discusses what Bannon means for American democracy. And she says, this is not in your quotes. I will tell you when we go to the quotes. She says, and last of all, perhaps above all else, straight up megalomania about Steve Bannon. You can read this in the first excerpt of the article. This is available to everyone. And last of all, perhaps above all else, straight up megalomania, describing Bannon, which even those who profess affection for the man can see, though it appears to be a problem only for those who believe, as I do, that he, Steve Bannon, is attempting to insert a lit bomb into the mouth of American democracy. So she sees the danger in Steve Bannon, and she recognizes the megalomania in Bannon. And you probably remember this, but when Trump was president, he was also being described as a megalomaniac, as was Putin. So a lot of far-right ideologues, they got kicked out of YouTube, amongst them also Steve Bannon. His podcast or show, The War Room, is not on YouTube anymore. And it has become more silent in this way, but we need to recognize this silence as being a deceptive silence, because all these people, they have not disappeared. They've simply transferred themselves to other channels, other places where they can express themselves. So it has actually simply become even harder to track them in some ways. And now we can go to the quotes. We're going to read the first quote. Maybe some of you can read the first quote. Just volunteer. I don't want to take.
Do you want to read?
Bannon was recalling his Hong Kong days in the 2000s when he was working for internet gaming entertainment. He notes how stunned he was to discover how many people played multiplayer online games and how intensely they played them. But then he breaks it down for Morris using the example of a theoretical man named Dave in accounts payable who one day drops dead. Just carry on?
Yeah, you could just carry on.
Some preacher from a church or some guy from a funeral who's never met him does a 10-minute eulogy and he says a few prayers. Bannon says, and that's Dave, but that's offline Dave. Online Dave is a whole other story. Dave in the game is Ajax. Bannon continues, and Ajax is like the man. Ajax gets a procession when he dies and is carried off in a raging funeral pile. The rival group comes out and attacks, where the literally thousands of people there, there's literally thousands of people there, Bannon says. People are home playing the game, and guys are not going to work, and women are not going to work because it's Ajax. Now, who's more real? Bannon asks. Dave in accounting or Ajax? Bannon realized that some people, particularly disaffected men, actively prefer and better identify with the online versions of themselves. He kept this top of mind when he took over Breitbart News.
Thank you. So Bannon, he's surprised actually to see that people, men, primarily disaffected young men, you know, they have this other personality online than they have in real life. Dave is this person who works in accounting, but Dave in this game is Ajax, and this death that happens here, I presume that this is in the game. You know, Ajax, he dies, and Ajax was some sort of personality in the game, and you know, he got this possession, and there's a lot of when he dies in the game, and there comes this rival group and attacks. There's a lot of people. That would never happen in real life, but that is Ajax. That is not Dave. So what's interesting is that Bannon, this really impressed Bannon, and he kept this top of mind when he took over Breitbart News. So the online version of themselves, it doesn't really work in real life. You know, this doesn't. It's obvious to see why that couldn't happen. But Bannon has these realizations of what is happening in the online communities of gaming, in this case, and he carries these learnings into Breitbart News when he takes over. So I will read quote 2. From the quotes. He, Bannon, carries all that he's learned with him, and he decides to build out the comment section because he sees the comment section kind of like the multiplayer games. The comment section is more of a community, says Steve Bannon, than the city these people live in, the town they live in, the old bowling league, he tells Morris. The keys to these sites is the comment section. This can be weaponized. At some point in time, the angry voices, properly directed, have a latent political power. So I want you to mark that he says himself, Steve Bannon, that this can be weaponized. This anger, these frustrations that people have in the comment section can be politically weaponized, and they have a latent political power. So the comment sections in certain forums like Breitbart News have deliberately been created to foment these angry voices for disaffected men primarily. They're not just there randomly or because it's nice. Somebody has set them up with a purpose. Not to say that all comment sections are bad. There are comment sections in The Guardian. I like to read them myself to hear what other people have to say. But that's a different form than those expressing themselves in Breitbart News, for instance. So some of you, will you please read quote 3?
Wacht.
Oh, yeah. I mentioned this to Steve Bannon in the second time we spoke on War Room, which is his current podcast, but he doesn't like it being called a podcast. On War Room, he frequently talks about 3 levels of participation: the 𝗶𝗶𝗃𝗲𝗏, the 𝗃𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏, and the vanguard. It sounded to me like the gamification of politics. Yes, Bannon told me, that's just it. I want Dave in accounting to be Ajax in his life.
So thank you. So here you see that Steve Bannon, he's very deliberate in what he wants, what he's doing. And he says that he wants this fictional Dave to actually be Ajax in his real life, to empower him. And one way of doing this is through the comment sections. And also, I didn't know what a 𝗶𝗶𝗃𝗲𝗏 and the 𝗃𝗲𝗏 and vanguard is, but he says that there are these 3 levels of participation. And he doesn't mean in gaming, but in real life, in politics. You know, the bigger scope of all of this is politics, because that is where the real change happens. So a 𝗶𝗶𝗃𝗏 is actually a body of men, usually summoned by a sheriff to enforce the law. That's like one level. The 𝗃𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏, it's the 𝗶𝗶𝗃𝗏, it's like a body of men that are controlled by a sheriff. You know, a sheriff is the leader, and he says, you know, it's basically police, you could say, police, like go out and enforce the law. That's the level of the 𝗶𝗶𝗃. And the 𝗃𝗲𝗴 is it's more specially trained personnel that are able to like take control of others, or if the police is not able to do their job in enforcing the law, then you have this 𝗃𝗲𝗴. The dictionary also says it's a cell of indoctrinated leaders active in promoting the interests of a revolutionary party. Maybe that's more relevant in our context. And then there's the vanguard. The vanguard is like, if you have an army that's going to battle, it's those units in the very front. It's the troops moving at the head of an army. So we have these three levels. There's like an army, then there's the police, and then there's the 𝗃𝗲𝗴, which is the more specialized police. So the comment section of interactive gaming, which is where Bannon he took his inspiration from, is deliberately being brought into the political reality. This is in the 2010s, from 2010 and onwards, and this is being done deliberately. If somebody wants to read quote 4, maybe Annabeth, or somebody else. Okay.
Somebody else?
Yeah, somebody else.
Cool.
Somebody else? Shall I?
Yeah, yeah.
This is what happened on January 6th. The angry, howling hordes arrived at real-life avatars, cosplaying the role of rebels in face, paint, and fur. They stormed the capital while an enemy army tried to beat them away. They carried their own versions of 𝗂𝗍𝗋𝗋𝗋. They skipped a day of work, and then they expressed outrage and incredulity when they got carted away. Fantasy and reality had become one and the same.
This is from the article, Jennifer saying this, but it's just striking how when she makes this comparison, that it's almost like when Bannon described Dave being Ajax in this, it actually happened in political reality. And a 𝗂𝗍𝗋 it's like a war chest where you have artillery, your weapons, and so on. So they carry their own weapons. We know that. We have seen, I'm sure all of us, some documentaries about January 6th and read articles about it. It was quite literally a one-to-one from what Bannon described to what actually happened. So there is this connection to Gamergate. We can see that Gamergate started in, I think, when was that, 2014? Yes, within the gaming community. This article is from 2022, but is describing the rise of Bannon. So there's a clear connection to Gamergate. Bannon had an interest in this online interactive gaming, and the connection is not an accident. Gamergate was like a flashpoint showing what is possible when you combine the comment section on these interactive gaming forums together with angry, disaffected young men, or not young men, but disaffected men and online games. And we know that a lot of it has a common thread. It's misogyny. In gaming, angry, disaffected men, the men's rights movement, we've studied that a lot in the last couple of weeks. So, we could ask ourselves how much of Gamergate was real, quote unquote real, and how much of that was people taking those avatars, their own online Ajaxes, and hiding behind the comment section and that anonymity that the comment section provides, and launching their attacks. So Gamergate really fuses, and everything that came out of Gamergate fuses with what happened on January 6th and the entire political movement of Donald Trump.
But isn't the point then that the person online and the person offline is the complete same, that they just express their personality on?
Yeah, maybe before, it wasn't as acceptable to come out as this avatar that you had, online. That's something I think gaming for a long time has been an avenue for these disaffected men to express their views among their like bro communities or whatever, with other men, like how women are, how they hate women or whatever. They're, they unified online, but with January 6th and the alt-right and the far-right rising up through Donald Trump, I think, as you say, the offline and the online merged, and that was what Bannon wanted, and he actively worked to develop that this online version could come to the real offline world and be one. So I think, if I understand you correctly, you're right. So Bannon's desire was, I've written it here in my notes, to not make these people anonymous anymore, but to make it a living reality. And that's what happened. We see that exemplified really well in January 6th, storming of the Capitol. And the point of all of this is to say that nothing around Gamergate or this history with January 6th was an accident. It was actually a plan that was laid by people like Bannon and was executed gradually. So I hope you got that point. It was not an accident. Nothing around Gamergate or this history. It's not just something that exploded out of nowhere. It didn't happen in a vacuum. So now we will go back to the article that I think you read and discussed last week by Open Democracy. I haven't read it, but I understood that because I didn't know which article it was, and I didn't have the time actually this time. But it's about the left wing's hyper-focus on Israel and Palestine. Was that what you discussed?
Read it.
Okay,
We kind
skimmed it.
through it, right?
Okay.
I think we read parts of the one from Atlantic.
Okay, I think we will still, we will not go into
long.
this one from the Atlantic. This one. No.
This one.
Oh, from Open Democracy. I don't know. I don't have it, so I couldn't see it. But we will still stick to the article from the Atlantic. But I think we just make some comparisons with an article by the Open Democracy. We will go through some observations that the author of the Jennifer from the Atlantic article, she has after many months of studying and interacting with Steve Bannon, with his community, with his podcast, The War Room. And as I already said, Steve Bannon's podcast was thrown off YouTube together with a lot of far-right channels or people that were promoting far-right ideologies, maybe, or far-right people were at least thrown off. But he didn't go into hiding. He's still just as active as he was before, but he's now just on Rumble, if you know that platform. It's like Rumble is like a far-right YouTube. You can go to rumble.com. It's freely accessible. And it's built like YouTube, but it's like free speech YouTube with, I think, very minimal moderation and censorship, if we can call it that. Like everything is allowed, and that's quite evident from if you just go on Rumble and you take a brief 5-minute look on the various videos that's there. So Bannon, he has tens of thousands of live viewers in real time, and there's this running live commentary that this author is following as he is, running his podcast. And she begins to see a theme. And I'll read some of the comments. There's like 6 of them, I think. 𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃 is just another degenerate Jew. These Jews keep showing up when societies collapse. One comment. Second, the Wuhan lab was a Zionist lab. Nothing burger with Jew sauce. Jews hate anyone that goes against the world financial machine. It's only a matter of time until the Jews destroying this country get noticed and expelled. Jews to the left, Jews to the right, stuck in the middle, Jews. So these are some of the comments that she's observing from Steve Bannon's comment section on his War Room podcast. So now we're going to read quote 5, and if I can read quote 5, then you can read the following quotes. These comments, all from different handles, by the way, meaning different people, are on Rumble, which carries 𝘃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 show live and usually has tens of thousands of viewers in real time. I didn't even venture onto Telegram, where I knew the commentary would be fouler. Still, I got used to it after a while, and I also came to expect it. Anti-Semitic rhetoric was the most abundant form of ugliness I saw from commenters during his broadcast, even more abundant than anything floridly racist or anti-immigrant-like. So Jennifer, she then approaches Steve Bannon with this observation. And Bannon, he simply denies it. And he starts listing names of all the Jews that he has ever worked with. But, you know, and that happens oftentimes. But then the author, she really doesn't hold back in her interaction with Steve Bannon. So she goes back to Steve Bannon and she starts questioning him about his podcast guests. And one of these guests is Marjorie Taylor Greene, which we all know. Steve Bannon only stopped having her on his podcast after she spoke at a conference back when the article was written in February, where the organizer Nick Fuentes cheerfully praised Hitler. Her beliefs, however, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene's were hardly a secret before that. And I also went on Rumble to find his podcast, and surprise, surprise, the latest episode is with Marjorie Taylor Greene. So she's back. So, you know, he removed her at a time, but she's fully back on, and I'm quite confident that her views didn't change. She's still just as conspiratorial, and yeah, she doesn't really buckle, I think. And also in 2018, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she shared on Facebook a video claiming that Zionist supremacists were trying to displace white Europeans with immigrants. So in other words, this is the Great Replacement theory, which is still based on anti-Semitism, because it's Zionist supremacists that are trying to displace white Europeans with immigrants. So it's an anti-Semitic theory, the Great Replacement theory. So Jennifer brings this to Bannon's attention. It's something that he's already well aware of. He's not ignorant of Marjorie Taylor Greene or her viewpoints, and Jennifer brings to his attention the anti-Semitism of the people that Bannon has on his show. One of them is also, besides Marjorie Taylor Greene, is a person called 𝘃𝗶𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. What 𝘃𝗶𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, heavily associated with the right wing, what he would do and was when he would make a presentation, or maybe also when he wrote a tweet, he would use this symbol here. Like, if I use myself as an example, if I would write something about myself, or, you know, they would use these parentheses. Yeah, when you do three like this, it's called an echo symbol. So if he would do a slideshow or a presentation or maybe a tweet and mention a name of somebody that he suspected was a Jew, he would put it in this echo symbol. And this concept was or not this concept, but this way of identifying Jews was something that really took off in the far right, alt-right, in 2016, you know, surrounding Donald Trump's election. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, if you know it, it's an institution that monitors hate groups and far-right groups in the United States, and it does an annual report about, you know, the threats that it identifies in the USA. It called him out on this, 𝘃𝗶𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, that he did this to identify Jews. And 𝘃𝗶𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃's response was, he posted a selfie of himself outside of Auschwitz, and then he said that, you know, it's the last time that somebody tried to identify a group of people based on a characteristic or something, it didn't end well. So that was his response to it. I'll leave it here. he posted a selfie outside of Auschwitz, and then he said that there isn't a good track record of identifying a group of people based on one characteristic or something. So he basically flipped the tables and said, like, yeah, it's obvious. That was his response to it. The point of all of this, of Marjorie Taylor Greene pushing the great replacement theory, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗿 using the symbol, is to say that there is abundant anti-Semitism in the far right. And Bannon, he's observing this, he brings these people onto his show, and he deliberately foments that. And January 6th are connected to all these events.
Is this guy on this show?
Yes, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗿. His last name is 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗿. You can look him up. Right. Now let's take a little closer look at anti-Semitism, and we will read quote 6. Some of you can read it. It's from Whoopi Goldberg, who is she's a comedian, and she had a statement about the Holocaust. If somebody would like to read quote 6.
Yeah.
You just read it a bit.
6.
Yeah.
Whoopi Goldberg said about the Holocaust, let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race, she said. It's not about race. It's not about race. It's about man's inhumanity to man. Co-host and then Navarro pointed out, but it's about white supremacists going after Jews. Goldberg says, but these are two white groups of people. Even in her apology, she doubled down. She said, most of the Nazis were white people, and most of the people they were attacking were white people. So to me, I'm thinking, how can you say it's about race? It's about racism when you're fighting each other. Don't write me up. Don't write to me anymore. I know how you feel. I'll take your word for it and never bring it up.
So even in her apology, she doesn't give a true apology. She says the Holocaust was not a racist issue, and that she says that anti-Semitism is not a racist issue in this way. But we have in the movement, we have a strong prophetic argument showing that anti-Semitism is really racism, and we should be able to identify this. So we have the line Eden to Eden. So we have Eden at the beginning. We have Eden at the end. Just find a different color. And we see gender in Eden with Eve. Gender. Then we see the Sabbath issue with Cain. Worship. And then we see slavery with Ham. Eve, Cain, in the beginning of slavery that started with Ham. We see this progressively starting to become undone since the time of the end in the post 1798 history. And we know that it's working backwards. So it was gender first, Sabbath, then slavery. When it's about to get dealt with, it begins with slavery, then the Sabbath issue, and then now in our time period, it's with gender. So we put it here. We have just say 1798. We have slavery, and we just put this as the 1888 period. We have I'll take another marker. We have the Sabbath. And then since 1989, it's about gender. So racism and slavery is being dealt with first in the United States, then in the context of 1888, we have the Sabbath worship. There's the light on the Sabbath. And now we're in gender. But we also know that the Millerite history, it was counterfeited. We've studied the counterfeit a lot. And that is the reason why we can say, and we must see that, you know, with 100% accuracy, Whoopi Goldberg, she was wrong about anti-Semitism not being racism, because our prophetic message is very clear that the issue being dealt with here was racism. We know that. In the Millerite history, the post-Civil War history, and into the Civil War history also. But if Satan is going to counterfeit God's way of dealing with these issues, we know that Satan also needs to be reviving the Catholic Church, and he needs to have that same issue rise up in the midst of a broad systemic issue of racism, and that is the Holocaust. So we're going to do it in reverse, but the blue is going to be the counterfeit. Holocaust. I'm going to put an asterisk. You know, it's Satan counterfeiting God in as God is trying to reverse these issues that happened. So both of these, it's important for us to note, is an issue of racism, because the counterfeit, it's always going to, you know, if you have money, you have the real, you have real money and you have fake money, both are going to be money, and one is going to be real and the other is going to be a really, really close replica of it. It's going to be so close that it's difficult to actually spot the difference. And that is why we know that both the real thing and the counterfeit it's racism. So when Whoopi Goldberg says it's not really racism, we know that she is false based on our prophetic model. Because the Holocaust was not a racist issue, then that would seriously conflict with our study of the counterfeit, if that was something totally different than the real thing. And the point is, sorry?
What about the period? The period of the Holocaust is not.
Yeah, we know that
with the
study of the counterfeit. It's not gonna be here. It's Satan was, I think, 100 years off from God, you know, and it gets closer to closer. Remember the study of the counterfeit. But I just lined it up here to show you that it's the same issue. But you're right, Mark. It's more over here. Racism is being dealt with here. Then Satan tries to catch up and copy God, reviving the Catholic Church with the Holocaust later. So it's not chronologically in the time setting underneath each other. But the issue is, yeah, I hope that clarified it. But the issue is that the Levites and the Nethinims in the world, they need to see this correctly as a race issue, this thing with anti-Semitism being a race issue. But this is where we come into problems, or a problem arises, because the left wing, which we know, you know, from the study of the two streams of information, the left wing, if we call it the left and the right wing, the left wing is seriously struggling with identifying anti-Semitism as racism. And if they will not be able to identify anti-Semitism as racism, they will not be able to understand the subject of gender correctly as well.
Can you just explain how it is racism?
Anti-Semitism. So if we take the example of if we go back to quote 6 about Whoopi Goldberg, she says it's not racism, because it's white people fighting white people. It's just two groups of white people fighting each other, or just one group. But we know that the reason for like the entire, if we remember studying Charles Darwin, we knew that he started this, not he, but I think it was his brother that, together with some German scientists, they came up with this study of race. I don't remember what it was called. You something. And we know that evolved into certain
Eugenics.
in the world. Like you could split up the world in 7 races. You said something, Mark?
Eugenics?
Yeah, eugenics, exactly. That laid the foundation for eugenics, which was, that you can divide the world in certain races, and when you start dividing the world in races, you at some point will end up saying that some races are better than the other. And we know from Hitler's ideology and so on that the Aryan race was a better race than the Jews, the Jews as a race. And that's why, amongst other things, he wanted to exterminate them, because we needed the pure race. So it was a race question in its very foundations. The pure Aryan race should come to the forefront, and the Jews, and also a lot of other people, they didn't have a place in society, so they needed to be killed. So it was race. They were exterminated based on their race as being a Jew. So it was a race question.
Races were Jew, but being Jewish religion.
But isn't it also race?
Yeah, it's purifying, I think, human race, because they didn't want the Jews, they didn't want the Roma, how do you say the one? Gypsies.
Yeah, maybe you're right, actually.
They didn't want the homosexuals. They put a lot of people in the concentration camps.
My point is just, I'm not saying that it's not racism, just trying to maybe make it more clear, because at first sight it seems like it's a problem with someone's religion. Like people have a huge problem with Muslims. I'm just trying to see how Jew is equal nationality.
No, I don't think it is people that practice the Jewish faith. It is really people that are genetically Jewish, so that have Jewish roots. It's not people that practice the Jewish faith necessarily, only.
Good point. I didn't know that.
I think.
I think you're right. Does that make it more clear? All right. So it's important for us to see that the Holocaust is Satan's way of counterfeiting the true, and therefore, from a prophetic perspective, this is our strongest argument in saying that it's a race issue, based on the prophetic lines, that we understand the counterfeit and we understand how Satan works, and in this way we can line up how God is dealing with slavery in the United States, and Satan bringing up the Holocaust or trying to revive the Catholic Church. And if the Holocaust, again, I'm just repeating myself, if the Holocaust wasn't a race issue, then it would seriously conflict with our study of the counterfeit. And we know that our study of the counterfeit it's solid, it fits. And why I think that this is important for us to see is that if the Levites and Nethinims, they're not able to see this, how will they be able to see gender, which is our current and most important system, the right way, if they go wrong here already? She mentions an example, Tess, exemplifying this in our time, like where we go wrong, where the Levites or Nethinims, it's the Nethinims, they go wrong in gender. There's this incident where 30 men, they turn up to riot at a pride rally. So there's a pride rally going on, and 31 men turn up to like do a counter demonstration or a riot. And in the news media, or in the media afterwards, it was called out as being white supremacist, these 31 men, And the point is, yes, they were white supremacists, they were racist, among other things, but the central issue is that these men, they turn up at a pride rally. It's not about, race there. It's about an issue with gender. And no article was able to discern that. No article mentioned, hey, they turned up at a pride rally, they had an issue with gender. No, they were white supremacists. And we need to see why that is. So now we're going to take a closer look at the left wing and the problems that arise with the left wing, but keep this in mind as backbone of it. So quote 7, if somebody wants to read quote 7.
In 2020, there were 2,024 anti-Semitic incidents. Last year saw the third highest number of reports of assault, harassment, and vandalism toward American Jews since the ADL. What's that?
That's the Anti-Defamation League.
Thank you. Still don't know what this is.
Oh, okay.
First began tracking the data in 1979. It's tracking data. Yes. It's an organization. ADL.
The Anti-Defamation League is basically a Jewish lobbying group in the United States that is actively fighting against the discrimination of Jews. It's a big organization.
Nice. So it was tracking data in 1979. Experts say the recent attacks are being driven more from the political left than ever before.
So that's something that should interest us, that the attacks are being driven from the left.
Yeah.
Now I want to, in connection with this, discuss the BDS movement. And BDS stands for, if I put it here, BDS.
Oh, it's not this.
It stands for boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. So they want to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. I'm going to read quote 8. It's just one sentence. They seek, the BDS movement, to mobilize international and economic political pressure on Israel in solidarity with the Palestinians. And now we're going to read a long article. So
can you just say who they is? I didn't get
it. It's the BDS movement, which is so this movement, they want to fight Israel, we can say. We're going to read a long article now by Donna Milbank from the Washington Post, but I haven't inserted the quote, but I want to send the actual article, which we will read from instead. So let me just open WhatsApp. I'll send it in WhatsApp. 1 second.
The BDS is against Israel.
No.
So I've sent
sanction Israel.
I've sent the article, and I think I will screen share so we can all follow along. Great. So let's just read a paragraph each. I will begin with the first one, and then we can just interchangeably change who's going to read. So opinion, it's by Dana Milbank. BDS detours into old school anti-Semitism. It's from 2022. The BDS movement, which aims to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel and those who do business there, has long walked a line between opposing Israel's treatment of Palestinians and fomenting hatred of Jews and Jewish culture. But now, can you see my screen share? But now, one of its affiliates has plunged headlong into outright anti-Semitic bigotry, conspiracy theories, and implicit invitations to violence. I think I'm just gonna read, it's gonna be easier. You can all follow along, right? I can zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, perfect.
Late Tuesday, Boston's arm of the loosely organized movement urged its followers, as it had several times before, to explore an interactive mapping project, which it said would show how imperialism, racism, militarism, and Zionism are systematically connected in our communities. It does none of those things. The BDS promoted mapping project is just the latest manifestation of an anti-Semitic canard alleging secret, hidden Jewish control of, and the buying of influence over academia, the media, corporations, charities, law enforcement, and more. The project is, as Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, said, an anti-Semitic enemies list with a map attached. Its targets go beyond usual Zionist groups to include the Synagogue Council of Massachusetts, which covers liberal congregations opposed to Israel's treatment of Palestinians, the Jewish Community Relations Council, whose affiliated groups include Holocaust survivors and Jewish war veterans, the Jewish Arts Collaborative, the Jewish Teen Foundation of Greater Boston, and even J Street, a liberal Jewish-inspired group avowedly opposing Israel's policies toward Palestinians. Just gonna pause briefly. So this mapping project that BDS promotes to kind of see how it's all controlled by Jews, how they buy influence over and media, academia, charities, law enforcement, and so on. It targets all of these different congregations, which a lot of them, which we can see in this paragraph, are actually pro the Palestinian cause. They want Palestinians to have more rights, better treatment, and so on. The creators of the map, a crazy collection of interconnecting colored dots, called the project a resource for gathering intelligence on the agents of oppression to form our own networks of resistance. We have shown physical addresses, named officers and leaders, the map says. These entities exist in the physical world and can be disrupted in the physical world. We hope people will use our map to help figure out how to push back effectively. And how might they do that? It continues. We view US police on all levels as white supremacist, colonial institutions that have no role in our communities. We support non-cooperation, community self-defense, and resistance in all its forms. In all its forms. It's being repeated. I repeatedly contacted the Palestinian BDS National Committee, the closest thing to an umbrella organization for the movement, to ask about this implicit call to violence, and received no reply. In the nearly 2 weeks it has known about the Boston map, the larger BDS has evidently offered no pushback. The Boston chapter couldn't be reached for comment. I contacted the Council on American Islamic Relations too, a BDS-supported rights group with which I have worked to fight anti-Muslim bigotry, and was told, this is not an issue we're dealing with at this time. Why not? Happily, some leaders on the left have stood against this approach. Representative Ayanna Pressley, a member of the Progressive Squad, said of the map, it is not acceptable to target or make vulnerable Jewish institutions or organizations, full stop. I've spent much of recent years condemning the conspiracy theories, lies, hatred, and violence on the right, but the battle will never be won if the left is going to adopt the same means. In terms, and again, I want to highlight this, but the battle will never be won if the left is going to adopt the same means as the right, using conspiracy theories, lies, hatred, and violence, as we can see here. In terms of the sheer size of the threat, there's no parallel. Political violence on the right is far greater in both occurrences and lethality than on the left. On Wednesday, federal prosecutors charged the man accused of the racist massacre in Buffalo of 26 accounts of hate crimes and weapons violations. Since Buffalo, a man described as anti-government killed a retired judge in Wisconsin and had a bipartisan list of other targets. And police in Idaho arrested 31 people believed to be affiliated with the white nationalist Patriot Front group before an allegedly planned riot at a pride parade. There's also the man who, upset by the leaked draft of a Supreme Court opinion overturning Roe v. Wade, hatched a plot to kill Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh before turning himself in. There is no place in civilized society for such acts, nor for rhetoric that motivates the unstable to do the terrible, nor is there a place for a BDS movement if it is going to use justified anger with Israel's policies to foment anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and to implicitly call for violence against agents of oppression, quote unquote, including Jewish entities. The mapping project is ludicrous in its attempt to implicate Jews. It includes Jewish Boston, a publication of the combined Jewish philanthropies of Greater Boston, because it, quote, pushes propaganda which glories Israel, quote ended, such as Jewish Boston helped promote Taste of Israel 2022, which featured Boston area restaurants serving and promoting Israel's diverse culinary landscape. So this apparently glorifies Israel. The long list of groups systemically connected with supposed Zionist oppressors includes, okay, I'll read a little bit slower. The long list of groups systemically connected with supposed Zionist oppressors include the FLCIO, Apple, Google, the Bill and Melinda Gates Medical Research Institute, the Boston Globe, the City of Boston, Democratic Senators Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren, the FBI, the Harpoon Brewery, the Howard Center for Middle Eastern Studies, Pfizer and Moderna, an interminable collection of businesses, universities, and police departments, and seemingly every Jewish group under the sun. If the broader movement isn't willing to step in and condemn those among them fanning anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and violence against Jews, then BDS will become nothing more than BS. Bullshit. So that was a long read. But what I want to highlight is that this interactive mapping project, its alleged purpose was to show how imperialism, racism, militarism, and Zionism are systemically connected in our communities. And Dana Milbank, he's highlighting in this article that if the left wing, which the BDS falls under, it's not a right-wing organization, it's the left-wing organization. It's supported by left-wing people, as we will see in just a moment. And he's highlighting that if the left wing is going to use the same tactics as the far right is using, nothing is going to get any better in this context of anti-Semitism. And now, if you scroll down in the document with the quotes, I've included two tweets. One is from Ilhan Omar, where she praises the BDS movement. And this is to show how the BDS movement has a quite prominent place in the left wing. So she tweets, "Big win for the BDS movement, let's go." And this is Ilhan Omar, which we know is very left wing, very aggressive, so to speak. And if we scroll down a little bit, there's the second tweet. It's from BDS' own Twitter feed. And it says, "Breaking, Rashida Tlaib is the second US congressperson to publicly endorse the BDS movement for Palestinian rights. Thank you, Rashida and Ilhan Omar, for standing with us on the right side of history. We're part of a growing wave for freedom, justice, and equality for all." But as we can see, I hope we see the point that the BDS movement is not what freedom, justice, and equality for all look like. But the issue is that it's the typical idea of what freedom, equality for all looks like from the left wing's perspective. And I think, we should be careful, very careful in, saying that, well, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib is like pushing a right agenda, because when we see that they stand for a group like BDS, we need to see it for what it is. But this is in connection to what I was saying before. How is the Nethinims going to understand the issue of gender correctly if they don't understand anti-Semitism as racism correctly? We can see based on this prophetic model that it will be very hard to understand gender correctly if you fail to understand this test correctly. So she highlights that we're not really delving into all of this to reintroduce racism as the focal point of our movement's message, because we know it's not. We know it's gender, and there's a clear reason why we view gender as the litmus test, both internally in the movement, but also externally in the world. However, it became quite obvious when we tackled the two streams of information back in 2018 that we couldn't dissect the two streams of information without immediately confronting conspiracy theories. We knew that it was at the very foundation of the two streams of information. And when we start addressing conspiracy theories, that also means that we have to acknowledge the open anti-Semitism that basically underpins nearly all other conspiracy theories there is. Not just the conspiracy theories that exist today, but that have been for many hundreds of years before. We have to handle this accurately. Continuing on, there's quote 10, if somebody wants to read.
Yeah.
Mhm.
10?
Lisanne will read.
10 is not there. 8.
On
Oh,
August
no,
1st,
No.
Yeah, that's the
More
one.
down, more down. Under the tweet.
Okay. On August 1st, Rashida Tlaib announced that she had identified how Israel's occupation of Palestinian land truly interacts with the treatment of Black Americans. Cutting people off from water is violence, and they do it from Gaza to Detroit. She explained to the Democratic Socialists of America. The structures we've been living under right now are designed by those who exploit the rest of us for their own profit, on issues ranging from human rights to healthcare. Making a drapes parting gesture with her hands, she continued, if you open the curtain and look behind, it's the same people that make money, and yes, they do off racism. A vague they conspiring to exploit the rest of us for their own profit from behind the curtain. These anti-Semitic tropes have been used against the Jews for generations. If that weren't clear enough, she let it be known that they operated both in Gaza and Detroit, and only Jews meet that description. She went on to say the exploiters made record profit during the pandemic, and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories popular on the web. This stunning pronouncement left Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the Anti-Defamation League and the former Obama White House official, appalled. We've heard this kind of ugly anti-Semitic dog whistling before, but it's appalling when it comes from a member of Congress.
Thank you. So we see how Rashida Tlaib is basically pushing conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that the Jews, they are, because as it says here, the Jews are the only ones that meet this description. As she says, a vague they conspiring to exploit the rest of us for their own profit. So she's not saying it, but it's the dog whistling, and it's clear what and who she's talking about. And just to highlight, we haven't talked about like what the BDS movement believe. We just talked about what they want. We just, it stands for boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. But the BDS, what they believe is they're not, as a movement, proposing a two-state solution. The liberation of the entire Palestine all the way to the sea, and really they want Israel as a nation dissolved, and that is anti-Semitic to say that, well, Israel, you're not allowed to exist. as a nation, as a race, you know, Jews, you shouldn't have a country. You shouldn't have Israel. So returning to the two articles that we've been discussing, this one that we read and the one from the Atlantic, we know Nancy Pelosi, she has had to fight the squad, and it might have been too easy in the past to say that, you know, that's the squad is simply fighting for equality, and you know, then there's the centrist in the Democratic Party, and then there's these like progressive squads, or the squad fighting for equality. But on some things, you know, they are centrist, but on some things they were doing the wrong thing. If we talk about, for instance, Nancy Pelosi and Biden and the other more centrist Democrats, you know, they are centrist, but they have also done the right things on other issues. But if people want to focus on the subject of gender equality, then it becomes a little more complex than that, than simply saying the centrist and look at the squad, that they're just pushing for equality. And she says that she would argue that actually the squad is not doing anything for gender equality today. We know prophetically again that Hillary Clinton was the answer prophetically in the 2016 election. Look at the squad. They weren't endorsing Hillary Clinton. They were pushing Bernie Sanders, and we will talk a little bit about him at the end. We're nearing the end. So we need to ask ourselves, really, when we, you know, read articles and so on, are we following prophecy? Are we having this prophetic model in our mind when we sift the sources, sift the articles, or are we following how we feel about these issues? That it's nice to look at AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and like see how progressive they are and how they're fighting. Are we following what's popular on the left, or are we really being governed by our prophetic message? What I found interesting was also, if we look at the 1888 and the Sunday Law period, they wanted to change the constitution back then. And it wasn't to take care of, you know, the small group of Adventists, but rather, again, it was to target the Jews and the immigrating Irish Catholics. So the Sunday Law in 1888 was actually anti-Semitic plus anti-immigration. That's quite interesting, I think, that we also see there. And one of the problems, if not the most, maybe, or one of the most fundamental problems with the left wing is they view the West as one-dimensional imperialist. There's a quote which I haven't included in your in what I've shared with you. It says, "One-dimensional anti-imperialism, a selective and deeply essentialist perspective, believes imperialism is an exclusively Western phenomenon and sees imperialism as the sole source of the world's ills. It demotes other forms of oppression to a secondary position or ignores them entirely. I think more often than not, once you start going to the left, it ignores them pretty much entirely." And this is a feature, again, if we have the right and the left here, if we look at the far left, we can see that they have this one-dimensional anti-imperialist perspective, where they say that all other forms of oppression is actually secondary. It's not so important as the West's imperialism. That is the biggest problem in the world today. And it's against this backdrop that the left have this view of a one-dimensional anti-imperialistic perspective, that the left's over-attunement to Israel must be understood. It's not that we don't understand the needs of Palestinians, but we have to put it in the right context. So I believe you have quote 11. Do you have it, or is it numbered different?
We have it.
Can you read it? Can someone read it?
The suggestion that the Jewish state should not exist, a call nearly never directed at any other country, is often an outcome of the white supremacist allegation. Intimating that Israel should not exist would be threatening to any community, and any community that you tell should not exist. But it's deeply unsettling To the majority of American Jews who are reminded of the annihilationists' goal of Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, and who hear echoes of century-old calls from expulsion of Jews from locals around across the globe. Locales.
This is a quote from the Anti-Defamation League. They did an article on left-wing candidates, and a lot of them, like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, as we've just read, they're endorsing BDS. BDS is basically saying Israel should not exist, and that is saying the same thing as Iran is saying, as Hezbollah is saying, and Hamas is saying. And if you remove the protections for Israel, you would very quickly see plus 6 million deaths, because there's a lot of agents, we could say Iran and so on, that wants to remove Israel from the face of the earth. So there's a stark consistency in the far left in not calling for a two-state solution, but to an end to Israel. I hope we see that. And there is no excuse for ignorance on anti-Semitism. 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗲𝗃 says this again. This isn't to make anti-Semitism the core point of our prophetic message. It's not. But these people are incapable of dealing with sexism and gender equality worldwide today because of this issue that they have, which is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism blocks them from correctly dealing with sexism and gender inequality worldwide. So we are basically at the end now. I just want to kind of summarize and connect the dots. Yeah, so we're gonna touch on him, I think, just very briefly here.
That last thing that you said, Emilis, that was nice. Can you repeat that? About
I can.
That anti-Semitists are not.
So these people on the far left today, these people, if we just say Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and those affiliated with them, they are incapable of really dealing with sexism and gender inequality worldwide today, and it's because of their problems with anti-Semitism that they have. It blocks them of seeing sexism and gender inequality in the right way, because they cannot see how racist they are in basically supporting BDS, in saying that Israel should not exist. So they're failing. Maybe it has to do with them failing this test, because we know that you cannot fail one test and then proceed and pass, some other test. They have an issue here. It's like, if you cannot see this issue correctly, how will you be able to see gender correctly and spot it? Subtle,
but also just deep.
Yeah, deep rooted. Yeah, exactly. So at the very end, I really like how 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 was explaining the problem for real, like the connection, if you have the far left and the far right, and how they basically merge on this point. So I will almost verbatim quote her on this last part. So let's look at how, or the reason that this faction of the left wing that we've discussed comes, and how they come into agreement with the very portion of the right wing that is forming the Sunday law without them actually realizing it. The far right will form the Sunday law, but the far left not form the Sunday law necessarily, but they have the same viewpoint. I think it will become clear. So if you want to go to Steve Bannon, you want to go to Tucker Carlson, the right-wing voices that are driving us toward the Sunday law, those voices on the right and this faction on the left, they come into agreement, they unify. And it's because that the left wing, They are very anti-imperialist, and the right wing are isolationist. You know, the left wing will say, well, you know, the United States, they're not really any better than Russia or Assad in Syria and so on. And the far right, they are isolationist. And anti-imperialism and isolationism, sorry, they aren't that dissimilar. They are different in their motivations, but the conclusions are quite similar. You know, if you say, well, we isolate ourselves, the United States shouldn't go into Ukraine because, you know, that's none of our business. We should focus on ourselves, you know, America first. And then anti-imperialism, which accuses the United States of meddling in other countries' affairs. They're basically saying they shouldn't go there. They should just be at home, like mind their own business. They aren't that dissimilar. Of course, there are differences. So if the left hates US imperialism because they believe it's the deepest and sole source of the world's evils today, you know, that the US is still imperialist. And the right-wing isolationists, they see the United States as the glorious land. So what they do is the following. They see the United States and they, if I remove this, they see the USA and they compare, but they don't contrast. They compare the United States with many other countries, but they don't contrast. And what are we supposed to do, for example, when we take the United States and Russia? You know, we know it's, if we like draw a globe, we have the two poles. We have USA and Russia on the two poles. So there's a king of the north and there's a king of the south. And you know, looking at this simple illustration, the two poles, they're quite similar, but they're not the same. But they do look similar in that they are both poles. So Donald Trump, he looks like Vladimir Putin, and the same thing, king of the north, king of the south, United States, Russia. We can do the comparison, but that is just one application. That is when we only compare. Then you have some saying, well, the United States, it's the glorious land. We cannot say the same thing with Russia. So what's different? You know, we haven't looked at what's different, but we've just made a comparison saying that they're different, or this is actually a contrast. This is the comparison, you know, United States and Russia, they're the same. This is like a contrast. It's a glorious land and the other is not. But that is something that a lot of these people, they don't do the comparison. We'll get into that now. The right wing doesn't do it, and neither of them are able to correctly compare and contrast, and that is the issue. The left side, they can compare the United States with Russia, and they do that. They say, oh, well, you know, the United States is imperialistic. Russia goes into Ukraine, the United States, they bomb Iran or Iraq, and so on. So the left wing says the United States is no better than Putin. The United States is no better than Assad. Actually, when you compare Assad and the United States, Assad looks really good compared to this imperialistic West. It's no better than China. All they do is they compare. They compare the United States with the other countries. So when Bernie Sanders, this is where I just briefly want to touch on Bernie Sanders. When Bernie Sanders, he stands up in Congress and he says, like, you want to attack Russian oligarchs? Fine, but the United States has oligarchs too. So maybe while you're complaining about the corruption of the United States and the United States oligarchs, maybe you should also take a look at Russian oligarchs and you can see that it's the same. Maybe Bernie Sanders says the United States should also condemn its own oligarchs. So Bernie Sanders, he makes a good use of comparison. But what happens when Bernie Sanders, he doesn't contrast? What ends up happening is a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters think that's very interesting because we know Russian oligarchs kill people. We also know that Russian oligarchs operate in a deep state with Vladimir Putin. We also know that the Russian oligarchs control the media. And then they go and they say, well, wait a minute, the Washington Post is owned by a US oligarch, Jeff Bezos in this case. And then they say, wait a minute, if Russian oligarchs are like the United States oligarchs, maybe there is a deep state. This is all on the far left. This is Bernie Sanders support. And when you do this questioning, what ends up happening really is that what you formed is, if you keep questioning, like I just did, like in the minds of a Bernie Sanders supporter, someone on the very far left, what if we just draw it here, like we say left, portrait that, what ends up happening is like if you keep questioning like this, you end up jumping to QAnon conspiracy theories. And what just happened in this example is we formed a real live pipeline between the far left and the far right, because this happens when you only do the you compare the United States with the United States oligarch with Russian oligarchs, and you don't do the contrasting, because sure, there are comparisons, but there are also important contrasts. For instance, we oftentimes see a trail of dead bodies following Russian oligarchs. We don't see that in the United States. I mean, this is just one example, but there's a lot of contrasts that are being left out. And when you only compare, everything suddenly becomes very similar. And this is to say that contrasting is so super important, because if we don't contrast, we will inevitably come to the same conclusions. We will look at the United States, and I know I've done that in the past, or I've been inclined to do it. Look at the left and just do a lot of comparisons. And the more you compare, the less inclined you are to contrast, because it becomes clearer in your mind, and it becomes harder to see, yes, there are comparisons between the United States and Russia. We can see that from this model, but there are also important differences.
Like the last sentence you just said before, that the more you compare, the less you contrast, because I think we do that in so many things. We said,
yeah,
you see this,
yeah,
this.
It's very difficult to.
And then you just totally forget to contrast, because in your mind, everything just makes sense.
Yeah. And especially if you read a lot of comments from maybe liberals commenting on articles and so on, you can see that a lot, that they're saying, well, the United States is no better than Russia, than Iran, and so on. They go out and they have this, again, as we mentioned in the article or in the study, a one-dimensional anti-imperialistic viewpoint, where they see imperialism from the United States as the sole root of all the world's evil. There are other problems, but they are all secondary. The primary problem is the United States meddling in other countries' businesses. So when you're on the left, on the far left, and you begin to subconsciously or maybe consciously form this pipeline directly to the far right, you will not say maybe you believe in QAnon, but you will inevitably go there. What happens is, if you're on the left, you become incapable of addressing major issues with foreign policy, for instance. And then when you bring it down to gender, they will be incapable of addressing worldwide sexism, especially when the Sunday law needs to come down to the very deepest layers and understanding of cultures worldwide. Because you go to the far left, but you end up coming to the far right in your thinking. So my final statement is that a pure comparison and no contrasting between, for example, Russian oligarchs and US oligarchs, such as if we call Elon Musk a US oligarch, that creates a direct pipeline to QAnon. And this will impact how you view gender equality today. We know that the far right and the right that do not have the right view on gender equality. And the solution is not to jump to the very far left, because I hope that we see that there is a danger in actually ending up in a very similar place and not understanding gender equality and sexism the way that we should. So that is my final remarks. Does anyone have any comments before we close? Anything you want to add, ask, or highlight, point out?
I have a thought. Is Sunday keeping also anti-Semitic?
Oh,
Was it originally also not?
Yeah, I think so.
Christians didn't want to be associated with the Jews and started to keep another day.
Might be.
I don't know. It's a topic on my mind.
do you want Emilis to answer that?
No,
question?
no, not directly. Emilis, us just thinking about it, or I'm just dropping this idea to think about. But
Be interesting.
I thought it was interesting that this anti-Semitic subject becomes so big. I mean, Elder Tess finished her Vespers with it. Basically, it's the last thing she left with us. And when you look at the world today, it's only about that. So it seems to be really a big thing at the moment. And I just was wondering, because we call it the Sunday law test and things like that. And we're now dealing with anti-Semitism in the world. I don't know. I don't see. I'm not saying that this is the test of something, but like Sunday keeping, in my mind, is kind of like I don't know if it's anti-Semitic, but it's at least
It would be interesting to look it up.
to look it up a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, I was just wanted to drop this idea.
Thanks. Maybe let's end with a prayer and then we can discuss more freely.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
All right. Dear God in heaven, thank you for the light that you're continuing to shine in our lives, in our understanding of the world, of the political left wing, the political right wing. Lord, we know that we have a tendency, as we have come out from the right wing political ideology, that we are maybe inclined to jump to the left and even to the far left because we like what we hear. It sounds good. It looks good on the surface, but when we dive a little deeper into the far left, we can see that they don't understand anti-Semitism correctly. They don't understand racism correctly. And what ends up happening is that they're actually taken to similar positions that the far right believe in. Lord, we don't want that to happen to ourselves, and we are grateful that you are trying to teach us about these things, trying to demonstrate us how there is danger even in the left wing, that we need to be able to sift our sources correctly. We need to be able to not just take things at face value and just do a lot of comparison, which is easier to do maybe than the contrasting, because we're biased, because we already have a formed idea of what we're looking for in our heads, and therefore it can be difficult to see what's different. So I pray that you help us all to become better at contrasting as well as comparing, but always remembering to use the two. We know it's a prophetic model that you've given to us and that it works, that it's easy to fall into either side of the road, into a ditch, just doing comparison, just doing contrasting. We need to do both. Help us to find this balance. Help us to view all the political events that are happening all around the world correctly. Help us to identify what's important and what's noise, so that we may navigate this complex political landscape and be safe, come out with the right worldview, the right view on gender issues, especially sexism. Thank you for this time that we could share together. Thank you that I was able to present. I hope it was clear. I hope we all got just one idea or one thing out of it that we can think about today and maybe during the week. I thank you for that we weren't disrupted, that we could have this room and present in peace. I pray that you will bless us as we finish this presentation and we go about our day to do other things. Thank you for this time. Pray through Jesus' name. Amen.